Tape's judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal will soon bring to finality a matter which has caused the country unnecessary strain. The foundation also hopes that the judgment will finally put to rest what it calls a false narrative that former President Thabo Mbeki interfered with the law enforcement agencies to ensure that prosecution of the current President Jacob Zuma indeed takes place. Now, the foundation was referring to the Supreme Court of Appeal's judgment on Friday. Friday's ruling dismissed the appeal by President Zuma and the NPA against an earlier High Court decision ruling that set aside the NPA's decision in 2005 to drop corruption charges against Jacob Zuma. The NPA head at the time, Mokotedi Mshwe, based that decision on a taped conversation which he interpreted as showing that the then President Mbeki had unduly interfered in the case. The head of communications of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Ntendeni, joins us now for this discussion. A very good afternoon to you and welcome to SABC.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the viewers, and happy for inviting me to your program.
Indeed, this is one of the biggest stories of the week. What's the Thabo Mbeki Foundation's response to the ruling?
Well, as you have just mentioned in terms of the statement, this is a culmination of a series of legal events, not only starting now, culmination to the exclusion of the Constitutional Court of Appeal. But you will recall that President Thabo Mbeki was recalled from office as a result of the judgment that was passed by Judge Chris Nicholson, which was subsequently overturned by the Supreme Court of Appeal. So this is not a case that is in isolation, and it is in that context that the Thabo Mbeki Foundation says that hopefully this will now put to rest a matter that had been propagated by a false narrative to the effect that he had interfered with the prosecution of President Jacob Zuma.
Surely Mr. Mbeki feels vindicated by this ruling, and if so, in what areas in particular is he vindicated on?
Yes, President Mbeki, we feel that President Mbeki has been vindicated, but in the light of the circumstances and what has subsequently transpired, that judgment by Chris Nicholson actually changed the course of history of South Africa. And whilst we say yes, vindication, but it is no matter for jubilation, because we know where the country is now and the circumstances under which we find ourselves in. It actually suggests that having dealt with that part of the matter, we now have to look into rectifying all of these shenanigans that has happened under the presidency of President Jacob Zuma.
How has this case impacted on the relationship, if at all, between President Jacob Zuma and Mr. Mbeki?
Well, Mr. Mbeki has always occupied the high moral ground in all of this, because he knew what the circumstances were, and he knew that sooner or later he would be vindicated. So he had no reason really to harbor any hostile attitude towards President Zuma or even the ANC. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of the foundation and Thabo Mbeki. I don't know what the attitude of President Zuma and the ANC is towards Mbeki. But from our side, we are concerned more about the state of the country and the correction of the state of affairs in the country, rather than harboring personal and individual hostilities.
And it had a huge impact on the unity within the ANC. Can this be reversed?
Well, it is a matter that the ANC has to deal with. As you say, it has had a very significant impact on the ANC. And we are witnessing the repercussions or the reverberations of that decision since 2007. It is the ANC. I think one ought to say that the ANC has to do very serious introspection under the circumstances. We can take, for example, the case of Comrade Makosi Khoza, who has been hounded by the ANC for taking a position which is in accordance with her conscience, okay? The Integrity Committee of the ANC has had occasion to say that anybody who is faced with criminal charges must resign and clear their names. Is that going to happen? The ANC National Executive Committee has on 2 occasions passed, or at least called on President Zuma to step down, which has not happened. Parliament has had about 8 motions of no confidence in President Zuma, which have not passed, all because the ANC have stood behind President Zuma. What is it that they are going to do now? And the jury is out. All eyes are focused on the ANC now. What are you going to do? Are you going to live by the principles and the values that have guided the ANC in its 105 years of existence?
I'm actually glad you touched on the issue of the calls for President Jacob Zuma to step down. Now, former President Thabo Mbeki was quoted previously as having said that the people must show leaders the door, like political leaders who have actually overstayed their welcome must be shown the door. Surely he's one of those who are calling for President Jacob Zuma to step down.
I'm not sure if President Mbeki has put it in directly a manner as you are saying. But let us put it this way. Nelson Mandela, and I'm using Nelson Mandela because I know the quote directly, says, if the ANC treated the people of South Africa in the manner that the apartheid regime treated them, then the people of South Africa must do to the ANC what they have done to the apartheid regime. Now, the ANC and its leadership still have time to do that very, very serious introspection. But at the end of the day, this is a matter that concerns the people of South Africa in totality. They have loved the ANC, they have supported the ANC, and it is up to them finally, if the leadership of the ANC fails to save the ANC, the people of South Africa who hold this organization in high esteem, who hold the previous presidents of this organization in high esteem, have a duty and a responsibility to save the ANC.
Perhaps let me rephrase my question, Mr. Ntenteni. There have been mounting calls from within the ANC, from within civic society, from within Parliament that President Jacob Zuma must step down for reasons that, that they've been advancing. Is President Mbeki one of those?
Well, we are rephrasing the same question. Now, I wouldn't be able to say directly and answer that question directly because we are talking not about the power of an individual and the influence of an individual here.
Right.
However much influence President Mbeki might have, but we're talking about an organizational matter here.
Right.
Finally, it is the decision of the organization in its totality to take that decision. Now, if we look at President Mbeki within the context of the organization, and the organization finally takes the decision to the effect that President Zuma must step down, I am sure President Mbeki would support that. But, put differently, you will recall that when the question of how the parliamentarians must vote in the vote of no confidence in President Zuma, President Mbeki's position was the parliamentarians take an allegiance in Parliament to the people of South Africa and not to the party, and they must vote in accordance with the best interests of the people of South Africa. So the stepping down of President Zuma, if it is in the best interests of the people of South Africa, then I do not see how President Mbeki would be in a contraposition to a position of the South African people and the position of the ANC as an organization to which he belongs.
Mr. Ntenteni, it is a great pleasure chatting to you this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Sure.
That was Mr. Ntenteni, and he speaks for the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, reacting about the foundation's position regarding the spy tapes ruling which was issued on Friday. Let's move on to other news now.